Hi, welcome back guys, this is your friend, Mr. Fused Fiction Hub, bringing you another amazing story. This is the next part of the story, 2 Feet Short by Garrett Wellist. Chapter 6. Toshinori watched as his master, his mother, stood in a black dress and flowers in her hands. The ceremony was long over, only leaving those who really cared in the beautiful garden. Sure, a few relatives had shed a tear or two, said he was a good father and husband, but Nana had told him the stories. Only 3 people truly cared about the man who now lay 6 feet underneath the ground. Tainuri Shimura, Nana's husband, died a full week ago. They had sent their only child away to another area of Japan for his safety. She couldn't lose both of them. It wasn't the first time Toshinori saw his master cry. That had been the day she learned of her dear husband's fate. Today, she smiled. It kept the pesky relatives away. She smiled while tears leaked from her eyes. She smiled when she saw his body but didn't touch him. Toshinori would never ask, but knowing his curiosity, she said, "I don't want to remember how he felt like this." Her smile slipped away once the relatives left. Gran Torino stayed by his side. A yard or so away from the grave Nana stood in front of. She hadn't stopped crying since they lowered his body. "You know," she spoke in a soft but warm tone, "I always thought I'd be the one buried first." The morbid comment made Toshinori audibly gasp. Was that really what his master thought of? Did she think of death while they wrestled? Would she continue to think of death while he grew stronger? "Now I'm the one who has to worry about all the funeral expenses." Her chuckle was sober and wet. It made Toshinori's heart seize. Without thinking, he walked forward until he was beside her, watching the sun reflect off of the marble stone. Slowly, he reached out and took her hand into his and held it against his chest. She didn't deserve this. She was nothing but a light in his life, guiding him to his future and supporting him through his trials. She only deserves happiness, success. No this, never this. She sniffed and took her hand back, pulling him into a tight hug. He returned the embrace, still staring at the name carved into the marble. It was surreal seeing the death date. Would his master's life be stopped so brutally, just like her husband's had? The thought alone made a new wave of tears rush out. He held his mother closer, hoping it would squeeze the pain away. If he could hold her now, then maybe he would never have to look at a stone in the ground that was supposed to represent all that she was. It was impossible to imagine. "What are we going to do, Toshinori?" She sniffed and kissed his thick blonde hair. He let out a sigh and struggled to inhale again, the lump in his throat blocking the path to his lungs. I don't know." He gripped the back of her dress tightly. "I'll tell you," she started, tilting his head up and wiping a few tears away, only for them to be replaced with new ones. "We're going to smile, okay? We're going to keep fighting, because if we give up, all for one wins. Everyone he's hurt, everything he's ever said will be true. Do you understand?" He nodded and sniffed again. He couldn't let this get to him. It would only make the death of his master's husband go in vain. The death of each older of one for all would be in vain. It was his responsibility to carry them. "I promise." He sobbed it out. "I promise I won't give up." "Then show me. Show me you can fight, my precious boy." He kissed his head again and all he could do was nod. He felt loved, needed. She was depending on him and he refused to let her down. In a flash the entire garden was gone and replaced with the sad smile Nana gave him while facing All for One. Her skin was bruised, her gloves all but destroyed, and she was smiling at him. He felt Gran Torino's arms around him, refusing to let him go. He couldn't even hear himself scream for her. Horror curled through him as he watched the overpowered villain slowly approach her. He was going to kill his mother. He was going to kill her, and he couldn't do a thing about it. He would never hear her laugh, or see her smile again. He would never feel her strong arms embrace him, love him, ever again. Only then did he know the pain his master felt during that summer day, at the funeral. Toshinori woke up shivering. It was still too dark to be morning and the faces on the blankets above him were obscured. Izuka was still snoring, a thin trail of drool running down his cheek and pulling on his pillow. Sitting up, the blonde noticed similar pulls on his own pillow. In numb confusion, Toshinori touches his face, startled when he felt wet tears running down his cheeks. It made sense for him to be crying in his sleep. His heart still ached with longing and he still felt the need to cry, even if he already was. He had been plagued with similar nightmares for years after her death. It seemed like every dream he had in America was about his master. They only really stopped becoming so frequent once his work consumed him. He had no extra time for dreams during that time. Now, he wanted to be held. He wanted the comfort and love Nana always gave him, but he'd never get it back. He knew that. He's known that for a while now, but it hurt like the first realization did. Hugging his blanket closer, he stared at Izuku's peaceful face. He knew the man would be more than willing to comfort him, but he couldn't ask that of him. He couldn't wake him up when he had classes in the morning for his own selfish needs. Instead, he slowly crawled out from under the fort and looked around. He checked each corner, anywhere a villain could be hiding to take him away, to hurt him. With a quiet sniff, he stood up and padded toward the kitchen. He just needed water. Taking their tea was intruding. It wasn't his. With his cup filled with tap water, He sat on one of the couches, careful not to move the blanket supporting the fort. He took slow sips, trying to ease the sorrow to no avail. When he inhaled, his lungs stuttered and released just as shakily. It was so cold. He pulled his freezing toes into the comfort of his blanket and sighed. Setting his cup down on the cushion, the coffee table was all the way across the room. He walked to the hall bathroom. He didn't bother shutting the door. He was only there to look at himself. In the mirror, he saw himself, but it wasn't the same self he looked at when he was younger. This self was still tired, still sad, and still damaged. This self still hated the way he looked. Chio had mentioned that, at one point. She said that no matter what he looked like, his own hatred for his appearance wouldn't change. He would always look wrong in his own eyes. "Are you okay?" A gentle and sleepy voice made him jump. Turning toward the doorway, Inko Midoriya returned his stare, squinting against the harsh light. "You've been in here for a while, but you never closed the door." How did she know that? Had he woken her up by turning on the light? He couldn't help but feel guilty. "I'm sorry for waking you up." Had broken bar. He rubbed at his neck, avoiding eye contact. "I was already awake." She shuffled into the small room with him. She stared at her reflection, trying to quickly fix her hair. It was silly to worry about fixing your hair this early in the morning. "Why are you up, then?" he asked. "I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Izuku and you. How scary it must be to wake up so different." She turned back to him and furrowed her eyebrows in concern. "What's this?" She touched the dried tear marks on his cheeks and made an attempt at rubbing them away. Shaking his head from her hands, even if the contact made him feel better, he made to leave the bathroom. "It was just a bad dream. It's nothing unusual." She grabbed his arm before he could make his escape, pulling him back in. She stepped closer to him now, a fire set in her eyes. "You don't get to walk away like that. What was your dream about?" He recognized this tone. She used it on him when she defended Izuku about the school's dorms, but it was softer now, more protection than defending. It was about some things that happened when I was younger." He didn't want to unload all of the baggage that came with his memories of that time. "Let's sit down." She turned off the light and pulled him into her bedroom. He hesitated, not wanting to go into a grown woman's bedroom, but she smiled in the way Nana did and insisted. "It's all right. You're safe here." She sat on the edge of her bed and sat him down right next to her. He didn't look around her room to give her some form of privacy. "Now, tell me about your dream." "It really isn't that important. It's a dream I've had often." He tried to pass it off. Her stern look made him give in. When I was about 12, I started training with a hero who saw potential in me." He began. "She continued to train me through my years and become like a mother to me." The ache of his heart made it difficult to speak. Inko nodded, giving him enough time to collect his thoughts before continuing. "Both her and her husband died by the hands of All For One, that villain I fought in the Kamino Ward. I sometimes have dreams about it, and tonight was one of those times," he finished. The kind woman didn't say anything for a while. She nodded to herself and turned back to him, a smile on her face. Her hand returned to his cheek and she looked close to crying. "You look tired." She slowly pulled him into a hug and carted her fingers through his hair. His skin tingled where her arms wrapped around him. He hadn't been hugged like this in years. "I feel tired," he whispered back. With a chuckle, she kissed his head, just like Nana did, and pulled away. She patted her lap in a silent ask for him to lay down. "You should sleep then." "Are you sure?" He didn't want to invade her personal space or push any boundaries she may have had. "Go ahead." The moment Toshinori's head was on the woman's legs, she started stroking his hair, and sleep was irresistible by that point. He always had a weakness for that kind of tender affection. Both Toshinori and Izuku left early the next morning. They packed up their belongings, taking the used plates with them, and left before Inko would force them into staying for breakfast. As Toshinori left, he gave Inko a warm smile and silently sent his gratitude. If the slight blush and sweet smile was anything to go by, the message was delivered. "And then I beat him on the last 3 rounds. Izuku rambled about their activities while sleeping over at his house. Thankfully, he kept all crying out, "That sounds like a real sleepover." "I'm just bummed you two didn't play Truth or Dare." "It's a classic." Yamada was thankfully careful to not use his quirk inside of the car. "Well, it's more of a group game, not super fun with only 2 people," Izuku pointed out. Toshinori had never played the cursed game, but he'd heard stories. Dave had had quite the slumber parties as a teenager, and all the stories that were told were strictly confidential. "So, dessert, pillow fort and video games? Nice." Yamada turned into the school's gate. "Maybe next time you two can use some bath bombs or play some sleepover games. I swear, you will never have more fun." Once outside of the car, they took their bags and walked back to the dorms. "Thanks Yamada," Toshinori called back. "No problem," he yelled back, making his ears ring and nearly pushing him over. They never made it back to the dorms. A suspiciously short figure stopped them in their tracks. Literally, before either of them knew what had happened, they were on the floor, staring at a less than amused old man. Chio's voice rang in Toshinori's ears. "I'll be calling Gran Torino." He was going to get beaten, Thanks for listening to this tale. Make sure you comment, like and subscribe and have a wonderful day.